Clarisse Garcia, welcome to Sports Spectrum. How are you?
Great day. I'm awesome. Thank you for having me on the show. It's an
Absolutely.
honor.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. You said great day, and I want to start there for a second because you said great day to me when we first met. And usually it's like good day or good morning or how are you? You said great morning, I think was what it actually said, what your words were to me when we first met before we even started hitting record. And that stood out to me. I said, well, why great morning? And I actually said, we should be saying that more
Mhm.
often. Where did you get that idea of saying great morning?
Yeah, so when I coached at Wake Forest, this sweet couple, older couple adopted me, and the husband would ask, well, how are you doing today? And I'd say, oh, I'm good. And he'd say, no, you're better than good. You have Jesus. We're great. We woke up this morning, and so it kind of got me thinking. As I say good morning, I'm like, well, no, I just told him I'm great, so then I should say great morning. So I kind of stuck, and kind of everywhere I've worked, people kind of grab onto it. I've got nicknames from it. My players at Auburn actually used to call me Gigi, which was short for Garcia the Great, because I'd always come in and say great day or great morning. So
It is a great morning when we have, life and breath and just the idea of even thinking that. Where does that mindset come from for you now as a coach, kind of instilling the idea of a great morning into, getting your players to buy into, hey, we're blessed here. This is an opportunity today.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times we give them time and space to just say, what are you grateful for this morning, in our meetings and things. And then, when you're grateful, you can't then also be something else. So you can't be sad or anxious or worried. So you can really only have one dominant thought. And so if we turn it into gratitude off the front end, then it changes the mindset and the attitude going into whatever's next.
I love that. Clarisse Garcia is our guest here on Sports Spectrum. She's Charleston Southern's head women's basketball coach. Let's go there from this past season. It wasn't the picture perfect season, obviously, that a coach would like as far as wins and losses, but I have to imagine there were a ton of lessons learned through this past season. What's the positive lesson that you can take away going back to last season and heading into next season?
Well, kind of funny about how you say, it wasn't the greatest season. So we were in the tournament, in the conference tournament, the, first round game, last seed. And so, when they announced our team, they were like in the 2-26 Charleston Southern Buccaneers. And in that moment, I just looked at my staff and we just laughed. We're like, It was that bad. And then we kind of just joked and we're like, well, thank God we're at rock bottom and the only way to go is up. And so that was kind of the icing on the cherry on top of everything, of just, okay, this was that much of a struggle as far as record was concerned.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, one of my favorite things in taking over a program, because this is the second time I've taken over a program, is just instilling culture. And I knew that we could possibly win some games. I knew that we might not win any. So we kind of just had that going in. I'm the forever optimist. So it's not the glass is half full or half empty. It's just always full, because then there's air in it. So it's already got something in it. So I was like, oh, we could win a championship this year. So, sitting at 2-26 at the end, I was like, oh, okay, maybe a little oversight of, our talent and whatnot. But, the things that you learn is just that, keep fighting for culture. All of my mentors, all my friends just said, keep plugging away, stay the course. It's going to take time. So it just was really encouraging to just hear those things, that other people have been in my shoes, and that it's not always going to be this way.
Yeah. Tell me, the motivation of a coach to their players in a season that's very difficult like this has to be so hard. And I know we have a lot of coaches that listen, and, maybe it's, when we talked to Tony Bennett, they had the best seed. It was right after they had the number 1 seed and they lost to the 16 seed in the tournament. Remember that year? And that's like the worst loss you could ever experience as a college basketball coach, because nobody's ever had that loss before. They were able to turn it around and win a championship the next year. So it worked great for them. But we talked to him after that loss, which I thought was really interesting to say, okay, you just had a really hard, difficult season. How do you get your players to stay motivated? And I really want to pose that question to you too. What was that like to kind of go through a difficult year, but still have your players, you talked about that word culture, still have your players buy into that culture?
Yeah. Well, and for us, culture wise, we talk a lot about climbing the ladder. And I posed that question to them when I first took over the position. And I asked them, I said, well, what does it look like in basketball? What happens in basketball when you climb a ladder? And they were good. They're like, you go step by step. And I'm like, that's great. You don't skip steps. I was like, that's awesome. They said it's a process. You got to go step by step through the process. I said, even better. And then I said, okay, maybe a little less like deep. I said, so literally what happens in basketball when you climb a ladder? And they're just sitting there. And I'm like, ladies, you cut down nets. And so they're like, oh, we didn't think it was that. And I said, no, that's what you do. And so, just to give them the visual of that at the beginning of the season, our men's coach, Coach Barclay, has been at our school for, gosh, I think 18 seasons, and he's been phenomenal. And, he's won, championships, and he's had very successful teams and players that play overseas, and just a really outstanding coach. And so I asked him, I said, hey, can you come down and teach my girls how to cut down a net, because when we get there, I don't want them to look at me and be like, oh, we don't know what to do. And
Yeah.
so I told him, I said, this is the vision of it. And so I told him, though, in order to get there, you have to make value-based decisions. And so all season, we just preach value-based decisions over feeling-based decisions. And so, some days you're not going to feel like practicing hard, especially coming off of a loss. Some days you're not going to feel like going to class because we got back at 3 a.m., and so we have to figure out what are we going to value and then make our decisions based off that. And then the second part of that, in a lot of ways, we really tried to get this team to resurrect and find fight. And it took almost the whole season because, we'd have like 2 great quarters and then a third quarter blowout, and then you're just playing catch up the rest of the game. Or, we'd have a really bad start and then you're playing catch up the rest of the game. And so, we really were just trying to teach them, hey, we've got to put 4 quarters together. And so towards the end of the season, I mean, a lot of people would even say they noticed the difference in the girls, and we really just were trying to help them find their fight. And we directly correlated that to them as being women. Like, who are you going to be as a woman? Who are you going to show up as a woman? Like, what are you going to put out there? What's your body of work going to be? Because I said, you don't have to tell people who you are. They'll see who you are on the court. If you start facing adversity in a game and then you stop fighting, or, you may get nitpicky with each other on the court, it just shows who you are. I said, we're not cylinders. You're not this type of person as a player. Everything is interchanging and we're not silos. And so, I really just challenged them, and then we always told them that grown women handle their business. And, so what's your business? Know the scouting report, work hard to get the assignments right, get your assignments done on the court and produce. So
Handle your business is good. So I'm guessing, the last game you move on, you say not goodbye, but see you soon in many ways, but you turn the page to next year. How important is this year as you're into year 2 now of growing this program?
yeah, so we kind of shuffled roster and a little things just to make room for, people that were willing to just bring in and recruit, and, that kind of fit a little better what we're trying to do as far as, even mindset and skill set and those sorts of things. And so, I'm actually sitting in Lubbock, Texas right now because I'm recruiting.
There you go. Right.
Yeah. So, we're hitting the ground sprinting because at the end of the day, we're painting the vision to the kids that we're recruiting that, we are trying to climb the ladder, which is doing the right things the right way with the right people to then cut down nets. So,
well, the right way for you starts with your faith, and that's obviously why we wanted to have you on this show. Tell me about where that journey with the Lord began for you.
yeah, so, grew up in a Christian home. So was exposed to it from a very young age. I mean, I was saved by the time I was 5. And that was in a lot of ways my older sister's prompting. We were at this Reinhard Bonnke concert or conference convention. And we were just, after he spoke, she's like, you need to go down, you need to go down. And I mean, she was everything to me. So I'm like, yeah, of course, like I'll go down, so I don't know at that time what an obedient decision was, but that was the first step of obedience I took. And then thereafter, the Lord has been showing me over this lovely journey, which it is with him,
Mm.
just, walking in steps of obedience. And, years ago, John Gordon has a book out that's One Word That Will Change Your Life. And
Yeah.
so it transforms you from getting this whole list of like New Year's resolutions. Instead, it asks you to kind of pray into, hey, God, what do you want my word for the year to be? And so once we had read that and, started, thinking and praying into, hey, God, what do you want my word to be? And one year it was righteousness. And I'm like, God, that's such a weird, pious word. Like, I don't want to be like, oh yes, my word is righteous.
That's
And
a church word, right?
yeah, it's so churchy. And I was like, I don't even want to tell people this is my word. Because they're gonna be like,
Yeah.
oh, who did you think she is?
Right.
And so, but I was like, all right, we're rolling with it. So all it ended up obviously meaning is just to walk in the way of the Lord, whether it's, he's calling you to, go talk to someone in a store, or talk to someone next to you on the plane when you're recruiting, or, just step in step with, okay, he is love and he is in us. So walk in the love that he's given us freely,
Mhm.
so, well, at great cost to him, but freely to us. And
Yeah.
so, I just think of the journey of what that looks like. And early in my career, I guess, I remember just reading through Isaiah and the verse, I think it's in 6:8. And it said, as the Lord is asking Isaiah, he's like, whom shall I send and who will go for us? And then said, here I am, send me. And that kind of was my heart stance, not kind of, it was really my heart stance when I was getting into the coaching profession. And I
Mm.
was like, you know what, God, like, I want that, like, wherever you want to send me, I'll go. And I think in that moment, you have to, well, people always say, be careful praying these big, dangerous prayers, because in my mind, I'm like, okay, I'm thinking more figuratively, not literally. So at one point I was 2 years, 1 year, 2 years, 1 year, 2 years. I was moving. I think even now I've been coaching 15 years and I think I've moved now 8 times, 9 times, something crazy like that. So,
Yeah.
I didn't think he'd quite take me literally, but we're here. So,
Well, that's what I was going to ask you too. It's seeing God move and seeing God kind of
mm,
direct your steps in the coaching world. It's really hard sometimes
yeah.
because you don't know exactly where you're going. You know that you might be in a different place, hopefully not for every other year. Hopefully you're there for 15, 20 years in the same place, but it's the coaching profession. It's kind of what is par for the course in some ways with choosing to be a coach. So how have you seen God move in all the different places that he's taken you as a coach?
Yeah, well, it was not easy. But, what's interesting though is that moving became comfortable for me because I just was like, oh, I'm really good at this now because I have to do
Right.
it every other year, basically.
Yeah.
So for me, at the beginning of my career, it felt more that my heart stance was, okay, I'm kind of seeking to ladder climb, which is interesting because now that God's flipped it for me to climb the ladder, it just means a whole different thing. So he always redeems what we, didn't do so well early on.
Yes.
So, I kind of had that motivation of, ooh, I'm ladder climbing and let me position myself differently as far as, I want to be somewhere else after this spot, or, I want to go D1 or, just all these crazy things that you're like, ooh, I want to do this. And so he then showed me, okay, you're on assignment. And that's, the one move that I remember specifically, it was when I was coaching at Wake Forest. And after my second year there, he wasn't moving me. And I was like, this is very weird. This is almost uncomfortable for me because I've never been anywhere longer than 2 years. So going into my third year, just through the church and the church I was involved with, had gotten was able to lead a women's Bible study, and it was, thriving, and it was just exciting. And my best friend and I were doing it. And so I got information that the head coach at Auburn wanted to bring me down there for her open position. And I'm like, it's the enemy. Thank God, like we can discern. And I was like, no, absolutely not. I'm thriving here. I finally have, lived my third year in one place. I'm like, surely God's not moving me. So I literally was like, no, I'm good. And so then she emailed me and she said, hey, before you tell me no, let's just have a conversation.
Mm,
And in that conversation, I just had this sense of knowing, okay, God, I think you're about to move me.
mm,
And this was the hardest one because it just was completely out of the blue. Like I said, I was thriving, we were teaching Bible study and the group was growing. And so I remember I was driving home to Pittsburgh from Winston-Salem. It's not a very long drive. I mean, it's about like 6 hours, so it's not far. And I remember listening to this worship song, and it was an Amanda Cook song, and it was, I think, called Voyage. And it was talking about, the path you're on, if you choose to take the next steps or something along those lines. And I just had that knowing. So I'm crying because I'm like, oh gosh, I'm moving.
yeah.
Here we are. So then, I'm praying into it. And God told me two things really. He said, because I was, doing ministry with my girls there, even my players and everything. And so one of the things he said was, if you don't leave, the leader can't step up. And I'm like, okay, you disciple for a time and then you got to let them step up and take over.
Yeah.
And I think of just how God would do that in the Bible, you build up the people and then you go to another group. And then the other thing was, he said, I've been able to move you because you're so deeply rooted in me. Location is nothing. And I'm like, okay. So then that's when I got the piece that I'm like, okay, this move to Auburn is going to be okay.
Mm.
So again, it's moving is not always easy. Being on assignment is not always easy. People outside looking in are like, man, you're always at different schools. And I'm like, I am. I'm like, talk to my Jesus about that.
Well,
So,
that's what I mean is it's a lot of seeking the Lord to know how he's
mhm.
directing you. And
Yeah.
so take me to the decision to come to Charleston Southern. And that
Yeah.
was about a
So,
year ago, right? So what was that like, knowing that this is where God was sending you just a year ago?
yeah. So also there's always a small story.
Doing
at
a
Auburn.
podcast, Clarisse, you can tell long stories if you want.
So, quick version of it. I was serving as the interim head coach at Auburn, and I was actually in the mix for another head job. And I was like, oh, God's teed this one up. It's close to family, friends, just super excited about it. I was like, clearly God has this one exactly for me. And in the meantime, Charleston Southern opened. And so I serve on a board of directors for, I have a nonprofit, and then I serve on the board of directors for another nonprofit out of South Carolina. And so the director, CEO of it called me and he said, hey, there's a position open at Charleston Southern. You need to apply. And I mean, I love that family. I respect him. We've worked together for years. I've been overseas with them. So I was like, okay, of
Mhm.
course, like I'll pacify you and whatnot. So, but in the back of my mind, I'm thinking I'm getting this other job, right? So I was like, okay, it won't even amount to anything. I didn't even know where it was located. I mean, I thought it was in Georgia. I didn't know it was a Christian school. Like I just had no knowledge of the school. So anyway, sent my documents in, sent it to the AD and everything. And within 10 minutes, the AD had emailed me back. And just being in the profession long enough, that doesn't happen. I
Yeah.
was like, it's weird. And so, you have your references and everything on it. And he had called my former boss at Auburn. And as soon as they got off the phone, she called me and she said, this has your name all over it. And, when you're in the mix for the job, you think you're supposed to, yet you don't want to hear that. And I was like, okay, well, why? And she said, I mean, it's a Christian school. You're going to love it. He's great, all this. And so, at that point, I was like, okay. And then it started to get a little cold at the other school. And I'm like, good gracious. Okay. So maybe we're pivoting.
Hmm.
And so anyway, I went, I had a phone conversation with Jeff Barber, our AD, did a Zoom and then did the in-person. And I just knew, once I got to Charleston, the other school actually about an hour before I was supposed to start the whole interview process called and said, hey, we're going to move in a different direction.
Hmm.
So at that point, I know I was completely released from that, what I thought was going to be, and was full in to here. And now that I've spent the past year here, even though we did not have a winning season or even close to being 500, I just know that God brought me here and I'm on assignment. So it's been very clear and abundantly clear. And I'm very excited about, just where he's moved me, whether it's 3 years, 2 years, 1 year, 8 years. I don't know. I never know.
Well, it's part of being faithful and trustworthy and being patient as well, with God's plan. Clarisse Garcia is our guest here on Sports Spectrum. She's Charleston Southern's head women's basketball coach. So what does discipleship look like for you now? Both being discipled, because as a coach, I think we forget that aspect of it because coaches are pouring so much in to others all the time. So what's it look like for you to be discipled, but then to disciple? Because even though you are a coach, I think especially when you're working for a school that has the same principles and values that you believe in, it becomes a discipleship opportunity as a head coach. So what does that word mean to you when you're being discipled and discipling others?
Yeah, well, I'll go back to a quote. I think it was maybe one of my pastors or mentors had said at one point, and they're like, everyone needs a Paul and everyone needs a Timothy.
Mm-hmm.
And so God has sent amazing Pauls, if you will, into my world, sweet older couples that just love Jesus and pour into me. I can call them. I love that they've all figured out FaceTime. It's really cool.
Yeah, that's a
Like in
good
their
thing, right?
70s.
Technology for the older people isn't always,
Gotta love
work
it.
out. Yeah,
Bridge the gap. It's amazing.
right.
But just having those people that I can call, and then just in my peer group, I have, obviously my coaching mentors, but my the people that God has brought into my life to be kind of my iron sharpens iron women are not people in our profession. And they're just like my prayer warriors, just the ones that I can go to and lean on and just be like, hey, I'm feeling this or I'm navigating this. Will you agree in prayer and partner in prayer with me? And those have been absolutely phenomenal because, the people in the profession are amazing. I've got some awesome people, we talked about Janice and everything, that do pray and whatnot, but it's always nice to have people outside the profession that don't even look at it from any other vision than, just through God's eyes and not, basketball related or sports related for that matter. And then, the Timothys. And so everywhere I've been, God's just brought either my athletes or even other female student athletes. I mean, even at Auburn, I was leading a women's Bible study and kind of co-leading a women's Bible study and just got connected then and was able to mentor like gymnasts and softball players and, just other female athletes. And so I think that's the neat thing is that it doesn't even have to be just my athletes that God's kind of put in my path. And, obviously we'll continue to do that at Charleston Southern with, the Bible study groups and whatnot. The other thing was kind of to go back to that Bible study I was doing in Winston-Salem. And I just kind of was grieved about that. I said, man, God, we just were enjoying pouring into this group of women. And so about a year, maybe a year and a half after I moved to Auburn, my best friend and I, who had been teaching it, we both got the sense, our teaching season isn't done. However, she and her husband still lived in North Carolina and I was obviously in Auburn. So, teaching a group was, kind of out of the question in person.
Yeah.
So we just prayed into it for about a week or so. And I just remember driving into campus and I literally heard podcasts and I'm like, what? So I'm like, I don't even listen to podcasts. No offense, but I'm like, I don't even listen to podcasts all like that.
Okay. None offense to
Because I'm like, I wasn't like super techie. I'm like, okay, where's even the app? So I have since started listening. So that's at least a good thing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't even know anything about podcasts. And so then literally maybe that week or week later, I met this sweet couple and she had started her own podcast. So she was able to easily get us up and running. And I think back now of how, grieved I was that we couldn't reach this group of women. And now our podcast is, streamed all over the world, really. And so I just remember thinking, okay, God, when you shut a door, you really don't always shut it. It's just going to morph into something that we never envisioned. Right. And, for me, I know a lot of people always say, I want my money working for me while I'm working and all these investments on the money side. Well, for me, obviously, because coaching, it's just the schedule demands are so high all the time. You're either in a game or recruiting or practice. And so for me, I can be coaching in a game, but someone can be listening to my podcast or our podcast. So it's like I can be somehow in two places at once. I can be ministering, but coaching in a game. And so I don't have to then be, in case I can't do that then in person, I can't be two places at once, but then I know at the end of the day, someone could be ministered to even while I'm doing something different.
Yeah. How about that podcast world now? So congratulations. And tell everybody, because you mentioned two things I want you to talk about before we say goodbye. Your nonprofit that you said you had, and this podcast. So tell everybody about that, where they can kind of check it out.
Yeah. So start with the podcast. So the podcast is called The Equipped. And the website for it is www.the-equipped.com.
Okay.
And like I said, we started that. It started as a women's Bible study, and now it has morphed into a podcast. And then we always put the notes on the website. We actually were going to record this morning, but we had to punt it to I think Monday of next week. So that was good. Just being in different time zones and whatnot, we were like, oh, let's just pivot and punt to next week. So we just always pray into the topic, and it's more topical than anything. And just really the heart of it is to equip you, to equip the people with what does God's word say about these certain things. So we enjoy it. We have fun. We're definitely obviously not complete experts and like podcasts or like whatever, but we just have fun, and we just hear from God and then just tell it to the people.
Oh, and if it helps one person, it's worth it, right, Clarisse?
Absolutely. Oh, for sure. And it's sweet because I'll randomly get a text from someone super random, and they're like, hey, I listened to your podcast today, and I was like, oh wow, it is out there and people can listen whenever they want. So so we enjoy it. But again, it's called The Equipped. And then the nonprofit. So, with the other nonprofit I was telling you about out of North Carolina, Impact Sports, I had gone overseas and served on missions and had gone to different countries. And I just have a heart for going overseas and doing that. And people are like, well, what about domestic? And I'm like, I do, but I think sometimes God just puts people in different places, and he puts in my heart, maybe international, someone else, maybe more domestic. But anyway, so I was actually recruiting and talking to one of my friends in the profession, Melissa, who's now the head coach at Boston University. But when we were playing in our playing days, I played at Villanova and she played at Notre Dame. So we kind of were connecting on the rivalries there. And then that conversation morphed into, our passion of serving overseas. So we just kind of talked into it, and we said, it would be awesome if we could find a way to get our student athletes over to get the experience of serving someone else and being, outside of your selfish world for a minute, because we're very, at that age, we're very just inward focused and what's best for me. So
very much so.
Yeah. So we're just trying to, get them a broader perspective of what life is like outside of our country. And so we, again, kind of prayed into it, and we just were able to get the nonprofit started. And the name came kind of from Bob Goff's book called Love Does.
Yeah.
And the organization is called Play Bold, and bold stands for Beyond Ourselves, Love Does. And we're now in a position where we've been over, I think to Guatemala and Kenya and Eswatini, and have had our footprints in Uganda. And it morphed from us going over and doing camps and clinics and Bible studies and whatnot for kids over there, or painting courts, or just doing whatever they needed us to do. And we now actually build courts overseas. So we raise money. It costs about $10,000 US dollars to put a court in overseas. And so we've now been able to put courts in Eswatini. And through COVID, we found that we can do virtual builds. So we can send the money over and actually hire the locals, and then they're able to do it. So we actually create jobs for that week for them. Wow. And so, we put basketball courts in now, which is super funny because my sister's husband is a contractor. And the first time we were going over, he's like, so you guys don't have any experience. You've never done this, and you're going to go do it in another country. And we're like, yeah.
God will do it, right?
Yeah, God will figure it out. So that's what we do now. We're actually, I think this year we're going to put another one in Uganda. And then that one will likely also be a virtual build, just, while everything's kind of in a place of unrest right now, and still COVID issues and things like that. And then next year, for sure, we're going to likely go to Senegal.
Wow. That's such a great thing. Do you have a website for Playbold that people can go to? What is it?
And that is www.playbold.org. And it is a nonprofit, so all donations are tax deductible, and
Yeah.
we do love to take student athletes and coaches over, just to give them again that experience of serving, and just seeing the faces of the kids once it's there, because a lot of them have never seen courts in person. Like, they've seen them, but they've never been able to actually play on a basketball court. And it's just something we take for granted, because I can drive probably a whole, 5 city blocks and find maybe 2 or 3 within a very small radius.
Right. Wow. That's such a cool thing. Playbold.org is the website. Where does the heart for going overseas begin? Where does that start for you? Like,
Yeah, well, I
take a
think
trip a long time ago and then have it start there?
yeah. So again, the director of Impact Sports, I was sitting in my office at Palm Beach Atlantic. I was the head coach there, and my office phone rang. I answered it, and it was this guy, and I had never met him, but we had a mutual connect. And he said, "Hey, you know this person. They said you're quality. So, we're doing this missions trip. You should come." And I'm like, okay, like this is awesome.
Yeah.
So I was able to then go over and serve, because the only other time I had been kind of on a basketball trip before that was to Myanmar. And it was the first time we did leadership through basketball camps over in Morocco. And that was very eye-opening, because it's a Muslim dominant country. And so, you look the women, the young girls in the face, and, the fact that we can pick our own boyfriends, or we can live by ourselves, or pick our own career, was just such a novel concept to them. And
Mm.
I think in that moment, I was like, man, I just want to go and help other people over in other countries, just see, what's their life like? How can we help? What can I pour into them? And so that's kind of where it all really got birthed in my heart.
That's so cool. As we wind down, last question for me, from me, is a question we ask a lot of our guests. What's the Lord teaching you today? What's he showing you right now when you think about where God has you in your
Yeah.
life, Clarisse? What's he teaching you?
Yeah, I love that question. And I love that you said, what's he teaching me now and here?
Because it's
Um,
every day we learn something different, right?
every day. Yeah, I mean, in season, you wake up and you're like, okay, how many players do I have today? Do we have any shutdowns? Like, do
Yeah.
I have to practice today? So you just never knew what a day may look like. But recently I started listening to Michael Todd, who's out of I think Tulsa, Oklahoma,
Yes.
in Oklahoma, but he has a sermon series right now called "Here is Holy." And so I've been listening through that, and it really just hones in on where God has you, not there, which is your past or future, like where God has you is holy. And in that place, you're loved, because he has you right here, whether it's hard, whether you're going through an illness, whether you're going through, divorce or hardship, or even greatness, like, you're winning all the games in the world and everything is going great. Wherever he has you is holy. And, that we don't always look at our circumstances or situations and think, okay, right now I'm in this, and I'm loved and it's holy. Um, I was able to kind of get my girls on the wavelength of, there is the enemy of greatness, kind of based off that premise, because whether it's the last play or what's next in your career or anything like that, if you're not here in this moment, you're missing out, and you're not fully able to give exactly what God has given you to your fullest extent. So that's kind of really where he has me right now.
That's awesome. Really good stuff there, Clarisse. Thanks for being here. Thanks for joining us on the show. All the best to you. And we'll hopefully get you back on again sometime and have some more conversation. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate you. And hopefully our record is flipped at that point.
That would be the goal, climbing that ladder. Thanks, Clarisse.
Thank you.